Good evening and welcome to tonight's debate. I'm Zach Lockhart, Managing Director of Hyperlocal Media and your host for this evening. To ensure that the debate is fair and impartial tonight, all 6 candidates were invited to attend, and all candidates, except for the Liberal Party candidate Jo Palmer, who has told us that she has prior commitments, have agreed to attend and are present here this evening. All participating candidates have been sent a list of the questions used in tonight's debate in advance and have agreed to the rules and format of tonight's debate. Each candidate will have up to 2 minutes to answer the questions and will be invited to speak in alphabetical order according to their surname. The questions used in tonight's debate will contain a mixture of questions submitted by the public and questions written by our editorial team. Our first round of questions will be asked of all candidates, while our second round of questions will consist of a question directed at each specific candidate, relevant to their campaign. Before any of that though, let's hear an opening statement from each candidate, starting with the Greens candidate, Jack Davenport.
Thank you. I want to start by acknowledging that we are on Aboriginal land and to pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. I want to acknowledge that this is stolen land that has never been ceded. It is Aboriginal land, always has been, always will be. I got into politics because I wanted to help my local community. I wanted to solve problems, and I wanted to help create a better future. I am in the Greens because the environmental issues that face this world face us locally as well, and what happens in the environment will affect us all. I want to be a climate champion for Rosevears. I want to fight to protect our forests and to protect the local environment of Rosevears. I want to fight for jobs and sustainability in the community, looking not just at short-term band-aids, but a long-term future. And I want to help clean up politics, get rid of the vested interests that influence government, so that we have effective and accountable democracy. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. And now we ask independent candidate Janie Finlay to give an opening statement.
Good evening. Janie Finlay, your independent candidate for Rosevears. Can I start with congratulating Tamar Valley News for the initiative to do this forum this evening. It's a great opportunity for members of the community to hear directly from candidates and to hear our response to the questions asked. One of the things that's really important for me that I've discussed with members of our community over the past year as I've been intentionally connecting across the Rosevears electorate is to reinforce and provide clarification of the role of a Legislative Councillor. The Legislative Council is the House of Review. It provides the scrutiny for the government of the day and has always been majority independence. Independents bring an open mind to the Legislative Council, and that's its purpose. I've always been an independent with my upbringing through local government, and I feel ready now to play a strong role in the upper house of the Legislative Council for Tasmania. As an independent, you get to work with the community, the best team. And my most recent example of my ability to do this has been with the Beaconsfield community. When there was a community need, I was able to connect with people that I didn't know and bring together a working group to address the need of the banking services leaving that community. And we've created success together. My name's Janie Finlay. I'm your independent candidate. I've been really enjoying connecting with farmers, families, small business and community over the past year. And as your independent candidate, I bring skills and experience to the role and look forward to working with the people of Rosevears and the people of Tasmania to act in our best interests. We need no more than before now to work together to ensure that we support Tasmania through recovery and rebuilding. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Janie. We now ask independent candidate David Fry to give an opening statement.
Hello everyone, my name's David Fry and I'm an independent candidate for the seat of Rosevears. I just wanted to start tonight to let you know a little bit about my background and who I am. I've lived in Rosevears for most of my adult life and together with my wife Kathy we've raised our 4 children here. I've worked in our local community, firstly in the banking and finance industry. Subsequent to that I owned my own business in the construction industry for some years, and I was fortunate after that to have been elected to the House of Assembly and was in the lower house for one term. During that time I had quite a number of shadow ministerial responsibilities, so I had a lot of experience in dealing with legislation and dealing with the processes of the Parliament, including all of the committees. Since that time I've managed two other businesses, one a fairly substantial business in the construction industry again, and over the last 7 years I've worked for community cricket with Cricket Tasmania and Cricket North here in Launceston. I've also been connected with quite a number of community groups dealing in many different areas, looking after youth, looking after older people, and currently I'm a member of the West Tamar branch of, the West Tamar Club, Rotary Club. That's a very active club, and again the Rotary Club's very active in supporting young people, raising money for groups such as guide dogs, and over the last period of time we've also been supporting the Flying Doctors. I'm standing in this election as an independent because I'm passionate about improving the lifestyle and opportunities for the people of Rosevears, and I believe that I have the experience, I've got the broad knowledge of many different areas of the community, of community groups, and also experience in the Parliament to be able to do that successfully for the people of Rosevears. Thank you.
Thank you, David. We now ask independent candidate Vivian Gale to give an opening statement.
Good evening. I'm an independent candidate. I have an independent mind. I am an independent thinker. What that means for Rosevears is that as an open person, I will listen to you, I will take your views on board, and I will represent you in the Parliament, in the Legislative Council. What's really important to know is the Legislative Council looks at laws coming through from the lower house. We are not someone who can do everything. Obviously we can advocate for the community on local issues, which I really am keen on, especially the safety on the West Tamar Highway and the Tamar River estuary. So what you get with me is I've been very lucky to have multiple degrees in law, business, psychology. I've just finished a Master of Laws. What I'm really good at is looking at legislation. That is my expertise, and as a legislative councillor, you can rest assured that and have confidence that I will produce the best legislation coming through from the lower house by amending and reviewing the legislation. So for Rosevears, what I give to you is the confidence that I could do an excellent job based on my qualifications. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivian. We now ask Labor candidate Jess Green to give an opening statement.
Good evening, and I would also like to acknowledge that we are meeting on Aboriginal land. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. I'm Jess Green, Labor's candidate for Rosevears, and I live in Riverside with my husband Nathan and our 5-year-old son Archie. Nathan runs his own small fibreglassing business, and I'm a union organiser, working each and every day to improve the lives of working Tasmanians and also standing up for the public services that all Tasmanians rely on. I've also recently been elected to serve on the West Tamar Council. I nominated for Rosevears as a long-time party member and proud advocate for our community. There is nothing more important to me than the health and well-being of children. That's why I volunteer my time serving on the board of Playgroup Tasmania and the Child Health Association of Tasmania, and for the last year and a half I've also been the president of Laurel House, which is a sexual assault counselling and support service here in northern Tasmania, but also the northwest. I nominated for Rosevears because I want a better, fairer Tasmania. The people of Rosevears deserve a local member who's committed to standing up for them and for their family. Win or lose this election, I will always work for my community, especially addressing inequality. Thank you.
Thank you, Jess. Now, on to the first question of tonight's debate. What are the most important issues that you hope to have an impact on if elected? Starting with Jack Davenport.
The biggest issue we're facing is climate change. It's a global crisis with local consequences. In Tasmania, this is most reflected through the future and safety of our forests. The government is risking 356,000 hectares of forest, which if cut down will contribute to increased pollution, increased bushfire risk, and even contribute to decreased rainfall. I want to make sure that our environment is protected. I want to make sure that Tasmania is protected, because what happens to our local environment will affect us all for generations to come. I also want to make a big difference on housing and homelessness. Homelessness is a choice, not a choice of those that are homeless, but a choice of government. It's a choice of Parliament, and it's a choice of those that are meant to review the decisions and actions of government. We can make other choices. We can eradicate homelessness. It is a political issue, and it is one that can be solved. And I want to make a difference on pokies. I'm the only candidate calling for the removal from pubs and clubs across Tasmania. This isn't just a social issue, it's also a political one. We need to stop vested interests and the money from pokies coming into our politics and distorting decision making. These are the big issues for me as your Greens candidate, and this is what I hope to represent you on. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Janie Finlay, we now have the same question for you. What are the most important issues that you hope to have an impact on if elected?
Thank you. The single most important issue that I've heard as I've moved around the community over the past year is to ensure that the upper house remains independent. It's important to understand the pure role of a legislative councillor, and that is to review legislation. So for me and many of the people that I've spoken to, electing an independent to provide an open mind and to be free of fear or favour in the way that we scrutinise legislation is the most important issue before the people of Rosevears and Huon. There are only 15 seats in the Tasmanian Legislative Council in our upper house, our House of Review, and therefore every seat is precious. Now, more than ever, it's essential that we elect independents to maintain the independence of the upper house. However, if I'm to be asked a question about what issue is important to me in the community, the one thing that connects all people that live in Rosevears is the Tamar Estuary. Whether you live in Prospect or Summerhill, or whether you're all the way down to Bass Strait at Badger Head, Beauty Point or Greens Beach, everybody in this electorate loves and cares about the health of the Tamar Estuary. So for me, having served on the City of Launceston over the past 20 years, I've become to understand the concerns and issues and the impacts of poor health of the Tamar Estuary. Under the City deal, there have been commitments made by the federal government, state government, local government, and also by agencies, by Taswater, Hydro, Dairy Tasmania, Tasmanian Farmers and Graziers, where they're all committed on a plan of action to improve the health of the Tamar Estuary. If elected as your independent candidate for Rosevears, I would turn my role to scrutiny to ensure that people are held to account to deliver on those commitments and ensure the improved health of the Tamar Estuary. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Janie. David Fry, we now have the same question for you. What are the most important issues that you hope to have an impact on if elected?
Yes, thank you. I'd also like to preface my remarks with the importance of maintaining the independence of the upper house. And as has already been stated tonight, it is a house of scrutiny, it's not a house of government, and we need people there who are going to scrutinise legislation coming through, not just rubber stamp or oppose them. I want to see better healthcare funding for the people in this electorate and right around Tasmania. I don't think there's anybody who wouldn't have a story about issues they've had with our health in confronting our health system and problems that they've had with it. I also want to see an emphasis on funding for preventative health. I think that is most important, that we help people to maintain their health. There's a huge prevalence of diabetes type 2 now, which is a lifestyle disease, and if we can help people to prevent those things happening, we're going to save a lot of money in the long run. I want to see support for sporting and community groups. There's a lot of spin-offs with that. It helps with mental health, it helps with people's physical health, and it certainly helps with a sense of community. I want to ensure there are programs and incentives for business and employment, which is very important at the moment. And the Tamar River, the health of that is very important too. And I would like to see a single authority managing the Tamar River from start to finish. We have a number of groups and councils who are involved at the moment, and there seems to be a lot of experts around who've got differing answers as to how we deal with the health of the river. If we have a single authority, we have all the experts inside the tent working together, I believe that we can make some progress on it. Yesterday I launched a plan for the development of the west bank of the Tamar River, which I call Tamar Edge, and also the joining up of a number of walking tracks along the river and cycle tracks. I'd like to see that developed. It's the little area where the silt ponds are, and we...
Sorry, David, but you are out of time there. Sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, David. Vivian Gale, we do have the same question for you. What are the most important issues that you hope to have an impact on if elected?
Thank you. The most important issues for me, to start with, would be advocating for local issues such as safety on the West Tamar Highway. The population all the way up the West Tamar Highway, particularly around Lagana, is growing. There's over 6,000 trucks and cars using the highway all the time. It's frighteningly fast and dangerous a lot of the time. So as an advocate for the community, that would be one of the major things I would be looking at, plus of course public transport, buses, and as mentioned before, the Tamar River estuary is a major thing that I would also advocate for. But then stepping back and saying, what does MLC do most of the time is to review legislation, that is to look at the law that's coming through, and my impact is using my skills in statutory interpretation and legislation and making sure that we have the best bills and the best law available to us, and not rubber stamping what just comes through. So what I'm prepared to give what the impact that I can give for Rosevears in the upper house is my legislative scrutiny and the ability to see things that other people can't see, and the unintended consequences of words within the legislation that, unless you have a legal background or know how to deal with legislation, you can quite often miss. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivian. Jess Green, we now have the same question for you. What are the most important issues that you hope to have an impact on if elected?
My number one priority is jobs. As a small business owner and a proud unionist, I know the value and the importance of a job to someone's life. And we know that during the COVID pandemic, in the peak, that at least 20,000 Tasmanians have lost their job. But before that, many others were underemployed, in precarious employment, in casual employment, or unemployed. My other priority is ensuring that our public services are well funded, in biosecurity, our national parks, in our health system, of course, where we have over 11,000 Tasmanians on the elective surgery list, our courts and public housing. I already do this each and every day as a public sector union organiser. The government are underfunding our public services, that is abundantly clear. And on a local level, I'll also be an advocate, of course, for safety on the West Tamar Highway, particularly that junction that isn't included in the state government upgrades between Acropolis Drive and Freshwater Point Road. That is a really important corridor for our community. We've got a local school that will be built there in the next couple of years. We've got housing developments happening there all the time. So it's important that that corridor is upgraded, of course, our sewerage infrastructure as well. With all of that additional development and demand on our services, we're currently having raw sewerage go directly into the Tamar River, and that's not acceptable. Finally, I will just be a proud advocate for our community, as I do each and every day already.
Thank you, Jess. We now move on to the next question in tonight's debate. Voluntary assisted dying is an extremely topical issue currently. What are your views on voluntary assisted dying, and if elected, would you support an end-of-life bill? Starting with Jack Davenport.
Yeah, thank you. I will vote in favour of the voluntary assisted dying bill. People have the right to make decisions about their future and to die with dignity. We do need to have a conversation about palliative care and healthcare services, but that shouldn't distract from the right of people to make choices about what happens to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Janie Finlay, we have the same question for you. What are your views on voluntary assisted dying, and if elected, would you support an end-of-life bill?
I support voluntary assisted dying, and I want to take the moment to acknowledge the work of an independent member of the Upper House who has prepared a very robust piece of legislation. I think what independent member Mike Gaffney has achieved here, having had many previous attempts at having such a bill supported in the Tasmanian Parliament, demonstrates what is possible both in the Upper House and by an independent member. I support end-of-life choices and the bill that he has drafted at this point, and I am sure that through the ongoing community engagement that it has, and I feel confident that it has, much support within the community. I believe that the robust legislation has the appropriate safeguards for both the individual and for medical practitioners. It's important to reinforce that it's a choice. I respect that there are members of the community that don't support this bill. However, it is a choice, and for people that do want to contemplate such an event, that this is made available to them with the appropriate safeguards. I have also long been an advocate for qualitative palliative care, and I believe that end-of-life choices and end-of-life planning is a journey and should provide a range of options for individuals. Quality palliative care in home and also in northern Tasmania, unfortunately we don't have currently a standalone purpose-built in beautiful surroundings palliative care facility. I have long been an advocate for that. I believe that we should ensure that we have quality palliative care within our community and that we also have end-of-life choices. I support voluntary assisted dying. Thank you.
Thank you, Janie. Before we move on to the next candidate, we do just want to respond to some comments coming through on the live stream. Jo Palmer was invited to attend tonight, and she did get back to us and let us know that she did have some prior engagements, and that is why she is not here, but she was given every opportunity to attend. David Fry, we now have the same question for you. What are your views on voluntary assisted dying, and if elected, would you support an end-of-life bill?
Thank you. I want to respond tonight by firstly saying and affirming my in-principle support for the right of Tasmanians to die with dignity and without pain. When this current government was first elected in the lower house in 2010, they made promises of more palliative care facilities around the state and more funding for palliative care. That, unfortunately, has not been delivered. What we do need are more facilities with properly trained staff, not just your average nurse or GP. This is a very specialised area of care, and when we have properly trained doctors and nurses involved in palliative care, there is no person who needs to die a painful death. I've done a lot of research over this, and some people in the community have told me that it's not possible for people to die pain-free in every instance. Well, that certainly flies in the face of the evidence that I've been able to gather from various medical people. I don't believe that this draft bill has sufficient safeguards in it. I believe it puts undue pressure on people to agree to assist with somebody else's desire to end their life. I'm also aware that the majority of the medical fraternity are opposed to this bill for that very reason. So I don't believe that this bill is about choice. I believe that it's about having somebody else assist you to end your life. I think we're a long way behind in palliative care here, and if we look at some of the other examples from overseas, and I think particularly of an organisation known as the Macmillan Cancer Care, who have certainly a long way further advanced in palliative care than what we are here, and that's what I'd like to see us pursue. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Vivian Gale, we have the same question for you. What are your views on voluntary assisted dying, and if elected, would you support an end-of-life bill?
I would support an end-of-life bill. Mike Gaffney has done a brilliant job. He's put a lot of effort, time and research to build the best bill that he can. He's had 2 draft versions that have been up for quite some time and developing, and now he's working on the 3rd and final one. This is pulling in as many safeguards as he can possibly get and listening to the community. He is doing what MLC does. He looks and builds and amends legislation which becomes law. I definitely support his bill. I think that, actually I'm going to read this. This bill reflects the views of the majority of people I've spoken to. Those drowning in pain should be allowed a choice, must be allowed a choice. I've watched 3 of my extended family die of terminal cancer, and there was no dignity in their death. It was unrelenting pain, confusion and sadness. This debate goes on, but it's past individual experiences. Anyone in the community will eventually be touched by a difficult death. And by supporting this bill, we give choice to people who need it most. I would ensure that my legal background would ensure that the safeguards are there, and I would work hard to make sure it's the best bill it could possibly be. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivian. Jess Green, we now have the same question for you. What are your views on voluntary assisted dying, and if elected, would you support an end-of-life bill?
I would support this bill, and I want to place on record my thanks to Mike Gaffney for being so willing to consult very genuinely with the community on this pretty emotive topic. And I would also like to acknowledge David Fry. I know that others in the community, like David, don't share my view about voluntary assisted dying, and I think it shows a lot of courage to be open with that stance. It's not something other candidates in this election have been willing to do. Palliative care should always be an option, but it shouldn't have to be the only option. I have supported a family member with a terminal illness, and I understand that palliative care does not alleviate all suffering. And unfortunately, in Launceston, you also can't always get access to a bed in Melwood. I know many families who have been in that exact circumstance. I've done a lot of research before I formed my view on voluntary assisted dying, and one of the most compelling submissions I read was actually one that was before the Victorian Parliament from a paramedic. And in that submission, they talked about attending suicides or attempted suicides by people that were terminally ill. And that was quite traumatising for them or their families if they come across that circumstance. It's always better to provide people with a safe option. And if people have a life-limiting illness, then we should afford them the dignity to go peacefully. There are adequate measures in this bill to ensure that there's no coercion and that the process would be under the careful watch of a medical practitioner, so I certainly would support the legislation when it becomes available. Thank you.
Thank you, Jess. Moving on to our third question this evening. Plans to build a northern prison in Westbury have been met with mixed responses, and whilst Westbury is not in the Rosevears electorate, a northern prison would still affect the people of Rosevears. What is your stance on a northern prison, and do you support the current proposed site in Westbury? We'll start with Jack Davenport.
Yeah, thank you. I oppose totally the plans and proposals for a second prison. We need to be absolutely clear here. The reason why the Liberal government is proposing a second prison is because they have failed utterly to run the first prison. There's no reason to trust them with the second prison if it's just going to repeat the same mistakes that they've made in the past. We need to be looking at better rehabilitation support for people in our society. We need to be looking at better supports for young people around mental health, around trauma, and for education and training. A second prison will not resolve the issue of failures in government, where they have pursued overly punitive measures that have had no successes and led to rising numbers in prison, but also seen a rise in crime. The Liberals have failed on law and order, and they have failed on community safety. The second prison is a bad idea from start to finish. What should happen is there should be massive investment in social housing. Not only would this help with jobs and construction, this would help alleviate one of the main barriers for people in struggling communities. There is no way that a prison should be built. Invest in rehabilitation, invest in youth support, and invest in social housing. That is the best way to fight crime and to keep communities safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Janie Finlay, we have the same question for you. What is your stance on building a northern prison, and do you support the current proposed site in Westbury?
One of the things about being an independent is that you bring an open mind to the discussion before the community of Tasmania at the time. One of the things about being independent is often you are questioned about whether you sit on one extreme or the other of a continuum. Over my 46 years, I've developed an ability to consider multiple options and understand the complexities of an issue. I don't exist in a world whether it's either or. I support a prison in northern Tasmania, and there are a number of reasons that I will outline for that. I don't have an opinion currently on the current site. I think it's curious that it was perceived that a movement just down the road might alleviate the concerns within the current community. I feel that any community would be challenged by having a prison within their backyard. However, the benefits to people that are within the prison are strong. I know that there are many stories of people perhaps on the far northwest coast that were in Risdon in Hobart and for the period of their term didn't have connection to their family or support groups. For young children who may have had parents in prison, this also disrupts and creates trauma in the community. I believe we need both. I believe if the moment we need current prison services, they should be developed, but I believe we also need to support people from a very young age that unfortunately fall into the behaviours of offending and then grow into adults that are offending. For me as an independent, I would look at these decisions and say, what is in the best interests of the community, of families? And that's about the prison and those people that attend prison. There are also economic benefits of having a prison in northern Tasmania. There's no doubt that the direct and indirect jobs serve a community well. Whether it's the current site is appropriate is not something that I've examined, but I do support a prison in northern Tasmania.
Thank you, Janie. David Fry, we now have the same question for you. What is your stance on building a northern prison, and do you support the current proposed site in Westbury?
Right, well, in one way, I think this is a bit of an unusual question for candidates in the Rosevears electorate when this prison is just outside it. However, as legislative councillors, we need to make a decision on enabling legislation that would come back through from the government or the lower house. I think there are a number of positives in this, and as has already been stated by Janie, the prison would be a lot closer to families and support networks for the prisoners who are incarcerated in this facility. It is often difficult for people from the northwest or even the north to get down to provide proper support to family members in prison. Now, obviously, if we're going to build a second prison, and I believe it is necessary, it does need to be somewhere. And I remember consultation going on in some areas, but not the government, back in the days of Don Wing, who was a proponent for the Northern Prison way back when. but there appears to be a lack of government consultation in regard to the siting of this prison. And as far as the site, I don't think too many of us actually know very much about where it is, apart from the fact that it's only just up the road from the location where there was a large amount of community objection to the siting of it. It is a very large project. It will bring economic benefit. It will bring employment, short-term and long-term. But let's remember, this facility is going to be a long time in use. We actually need to get this right. I don't believe there's been enough consultation with the community, and if it did come before the Upper House, my recommendation, if I were to be elected member for Rosevears, was that it needs to be further investigated by a joint parliamentary committee to make sure we get it right and to make sure that we've got community support for the siting of it. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Vivian Gale, we now have the same question for you. What is your stance on building a northern prison, and do you support the current proposed site in Westbury?
Northern prison is needed. People need to be able to access it. The north needs to be able to access it. Prisoners are people, obviously, and the families need to be able to see them, and they need to be able to see their families, of course. And being in the south, it's often exceptionally difficult. So it does need to be built. Where does it need to be built? As far as I'm aware, this is not a piece of legislation that will come to the Upper House, and so therefore, as such, Legislative Councillor wouldn't be able to have any actual impact unless, of course, it was a piece of legislation, but I don't think it is. However, do I myself personally believe it's in the right spot? What I'm feeling from the community is that there hasn't been enough consultation by the government, and that's probably what it boils down to, is that the government hasn't given enough time and effort to listen and hear the views of the community. That's my approach. I think you should listen to the views of the community and make decisions appropriately, and consultation is exceptionally important in consideration. So therefore, I support a northern prison, and as far as the location goes, we need more consultation, and it's up to the government to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivian. Jess Green, we now have the same question for you. What is your stance on building a northern prison, and do you support the current proposed site in Westbury?
It's very clear that the government didn't consult well with the Westbury community about building a prison there. I welcomed the government's decision to go back to the drawing board to find a new location, but unfortunately, rather than looking at the other preferred sites, they've just decided to move the prison down the road. No doubt a huge project like this could create jobs and economic potential for our region, but they must get that consultation right. There was a prison inspector report that was leaked this week, and that had some pretty concerning things in there that we should all be aware of in terms of keeping staff safe at Risdon, lack of training for custodial officers, a number of staff on workers' compensation, nepotism within the prison system. We need to ensure that if we do invest $270 million of funds into a project, that the project can be delivered well, and that staff are safe and that inmates are safe. And I have no faith at the moment that that can happen, looking at what was in the report this week.
Thank you, Jess. Our next question tonight is, if elected, what role do you see yourself having in helping Tasmania recover from the coronavirus pandemic? Starting with Jack Davenport.
Yeah, thank you. So, first of all, I want to say that the pandemic needs to be seen as a public health crisis. It's important that we listen to expert opinion, it's important that we support our health services, and it's important that we continue to exercise caution as the pandemic develops. In terms of the recovery, I want to make sure that any kind of recovery package focuses on not just the provision of jobs, but a strategic long-term goals for Tasmania. I want to make sure that austerity is utterly and completely rejected. The Liberals have been talking about belt tightening for a few months now, and I am very much concerned that they are looking at an austerity agenda that will literally cost lives, as we've seen in the UK, and will set back Tasmanian growth and the provision of jobs and support services. The Greens have a plan. We have the Green New Deal to invest in renewable jobs and to invest in environmentally friendly policies that will help promote a better standard of living, promote support services for those most in need, and will also help develop jobs in areas of construction by focusing on things that really do need building, such as social housing. I see my role as legislative councillor to scrutinise the decisions of government to make sure that they are focused on the needs of Tasmanians, but also to call for action to make sure that the right decisions are made for the economic future and prosperity of all Tasmanians, not just a few. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Janie Finlay, we have the same question for you. If elected, what role do you see yourself having in helping Tasmania recover from the coronavirus pandemic?
Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the exceptional work that our Premier Peter Gutwein has undertaken with his team to deliver for Tasmanians a safe environment as we address the challenges on many levels that have been presented by the coronavirus. I think Peter and his team have done an exceptional job and have the support of Tasmania in continuing to move forward in a very strong way to protect Tasmanians. If elected to the upper house as a legislative councillor, in addition to supporting the work of the government, it would also be the role to scrutinise work and expenditure going forward. And that is something that I feel very strongly capable to do and I would enjoy to do as an independent member of the Legislative Council. Not only do I have experience in community leadership through the City of Launceston, but I also have business experience, having operated 2 award-winning hospitality businesses, a commercial real estate agency, and supporting my partner in his global company operating out of Launceston. With that experience, as I've connected with the community over the past 12 months, whether that be on farm, in small business, or with family, in community or sporting organisations, I've developed a strong and broad understanding of the hurts that are currently existing within our community. I've connected intentionally with people that I've not known before and gone into industries that I've needed to learn a lot about. And I believe with those skills and capability and that willingness to get uncomfortable having new conversations, I'd be in a great position to support our community. I can provide evidence of the support I've provided in Beaconsfield in returning banking services much needed to that community, but also reflect on a conversation I had recently with a business operator who said I was the only candidate that had visited and stopped to actually listen to the concerns that they had and the impacts that they'd achieved and felt in their business. So as an independent legislative councillor, I would bring my skills and experience and my ability to connect and look after and act for the people of Rosevears. Thank you.
Thank you, Janie. David Fry, we have the same question for you. If elected, what role do you see yourself having in helping Tasmania recover from the coronavirus pandemic?
Thank you. Well, look, as Janie's already said tonight, I think credit needs to be given where it's due, and both our state and federal governments have had a very difficult job in dealing with this pandemic and still dealing with this pandemic. Particularly the state government having a very difficult balancing act between protecting the health of Tasmanians, but also trying to ensure that our businesses survive through all the lockdowns that have been happening. Particularly our travel industry, our tourism industry and the hospitality industries are the ones that are hurting a lot, and a lot of people have lost their jobs. So I would see my role as an MLC to support any programs that are put forward, funding for business and employment. We certainly need to learn from some of the downturns that we've had in the past, whether it's the GFC or even going back to the Great Depression. And the way out of those issues was for government to continue to spend money on programs, on infrastructure and supporting the community. Another role that I see for an MLC is being very much involved in their community. It's not all just about scrutinising legislation, but getting in there and supporting volunteer and community groups. Those groups are the lifeblood of our communities, and they certainly do a lot of good work, often need help with things sometimes just as simple as doing some photocopying, other times with assistance with grant applications and helping them to work their way through complex government applications for funding and support. So they're the sorts of things that I believe would be important and that I would like to be involved with. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Vivian Gale, we have the same question for you. If elected, what role do you see yourself having in helping Tasmania recover from the coronavirus pandemic?
As a member of the upper house, you have to scrutinise the legislation that comes through, the laws that the government want to make, and amend them if need be. Therefore, it's difficult to know at this time. It's crystal ball gazing right now because we don't know how long this is going to go for. We don't know when the vaccine's going to come, if it's going to come. All that we do know is that our communities need support, a lot of it. We need support for our children, the education of our children, the health of our communities, business, tourism. How does our state go forward? It's a very difficult thing. The best thing I can say as a lower house person, as an upper house member, is you scrutinise the legislation and you do the best job you possibly can. However, as an advocate for the community, of course you would be buying local, holidaying local, supporting your community in the best way you can possibly can. Get out there, meet people, listen, understand, take the time to understand. It's not going to be easy for anyone. It's quite frightening for some, but we're in a very good position. Tasmania's in a very good position where the government has contained it very well, excellently. So we're lucky. But moving forward, how does that look? I don't think anyone really knows, but we do need support and we need to make sure that we get the money and the funding, and also just to build the community spirit and hold each other together. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivian. Jess Green, we have the same question for you. If elected, what role do you see yourself having in helping Tasmania recover from the coronavirus pandemic?
If elected, I'll be working very hard to ensure that Tasmanians have access to the training that they need to upskill or learn a new trade. I will be a loud and proud voice for workers in Tasmania, because with 20,000 Tasmanians now out of work because of the pandemic, all politicians and policymakers should be focused on employment. I don't want to see us have to fly in tradespeople from the mainland to work on projects, particularly big infrastructure projects that we have on the agenda. But what's really clear with the aftermath of COVID is that we need both an economic and a social economic recovery plan, because people are experiencing high levels of mental illness. We have people in housing distress, and certainly as a supporter of women's services, we know that our family violence services at the moment are under immense pressure. The former Premier, Will Hodgman, made a commitment that tackling family violence would be the biggest priority of his government. The current Premier, Premier Gutman, has not matched that commitment. And as such, the Family Violence Counselling and Support Service, which is a government-run service, is currently severely underfunded. They get funding to deal with about 2,000 referrals per year, but year on year, it's hovering between 5 and 7,000 referrals. We know that family violence has increased during the COVID pandemic as people were trapped at home with their perpetrator, and that's something that really concerns me, and I think it will be some time before we know the true impact of this. But what I will do as a supporter of women's services is make sure that we hold the government to account. It's really important that we look after vulnerable people in this time, get people back into work, focus on training, and make sure that we get Tasmanians back into work.
Thank you, Jess. We'll be right back with more questions for the candidates after this short break.
Hyperlocal Media is proud to launch the Tasmanian Browser, your new source for local news and stories that affect everyday Tasmanians. For locally owned independent news and stories from local Tasmanian communities, visit tasmanianbrowser.com.au and find us on Facebook.
Welcome back. We will now be asking each candidate a question specific to their campaign. In alphabetical order, our first candidate is Jack Davenport. Jack, as a Greens Party candidate, would you judge legislation based on its merit, regardless of partisan politics, and ensure that the Legislative Council remains a house of review and not a rubber stamping process?
Yeah, thank you. I want to firstly just say that accountability is an important cornerstone of democracy, and I find it really disappointing that tonight the Liberal candidate is again absent from a debate in this campaign. People have a right to know what candidates think, and really Joe Palmer should be here tonight. In answer to the question, I have started this campaign and continue throughout this campaign on a clear platform of policies and beliefs. I've stated these clearly and openly. People know what I think about issues. My values drive my integrity, and evidence drives my knowledge. And there's a combination of these things that help me make decisions in what I do, whether it be in professional life, personal life, or indeed in elected office. People know that the Greens have integrity. We don't give in to vested interests, we can't be bought, and we won't sell out. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Our next candidate is Janie Finlay. Janie, there has been a certain amount of speculation from the community on your independence. Can you speak to your independence in this election?
Thanks for the great question. My pathway into local government was from a position of working with young people at Ashley Youth Detention Centre and approaching the Launceston City Council for support. Through my time at local government, I have always worked with community. But because I've been in local government for so long, people might perceive me as feeling like I'm a politician. But I actually believe what I am as an independent is provide service to community and as a community leader. I've never been a member of a party. I've been approached by many parties, but I've not ever made the decision to join a party because the skills and experience I have are valuable to me and to the community. And the feedback I have is it's appreciated that someone with my skills and experience is able to sit across the top of politics and to serve the community. One of the things that I love is connecting with people, having great conversations, responding to hard questions and asking great questions. And as an independent, I can walk into any room, sometimes I have to take a deep breath and sort of prepare myself, but I'm willing to talk to anybody and to have any conversation, whether that be hard or supportive. I'm fortunate that I have friends and colleagues across the full spectrum of politics. And sometimes that confuses people. They want to put you in a box. But what I offer as an independent that's never been a member of a party and that sits very much in the middle of the road is my skills and experience, my strengths and my willingness to work hard, to bring an open mind and to consider the issues before me on merit. And my track record at the City of Launceston demonstrates that. I'm an independent, I've never been a member of a party, and I'm proud of that.
Thank you, Janie. Our next candidate is David Fry. David, you are running as an independent candidate. However, you're a previous Liberal Party member and politician. Can you speak to your independence in this election?
Yes, thank you for the question. Well, firstly, going to say people change their vote all the time. If they didn't, we would have the same government time after time after time. I've had the unique opportunity to see the inside of a political party, not only the organisational wing but the parliamentary wing as well. And what I have seen inside that organisation has certainly motivated me to join this race as an independent. It's not always possible to be able to speak your mind as part of a party. And I think even tonight we've heard some of the party candidates certainly putting forward their party positions. I think it's important, particularly for the upper house, that doesn't occur and that debate from their members is not done behind closed doors as it is in a party. I can tell you that all the decisions that are made behind closed doors, and then members are very much, if not forced, but encouraged to support the party line. And I know in some parties you can actually get thrown out for voting a different way. My experience in the Parliament was 18 years ago, and I certainly learnt a lot from that. I resigned from the party some years ago. I believe that the Liberal Party is insular. They don't consult widely with the community, and in fact they don't even listen to their own organisational wing a lot of the time. They are just speaking to themselves, not hearing and listening to what's happening around the place. What I've really appreciated about this campaign is the opportunity to get around and be able to hear what people's views are, and not just spout lines that have been given to me by the parties. You may or may not be aware that the major parties will give their parliamentarians sheets of things and ways to answer questions, and I don't think that's good enough. We need independence, and that's why I'm an independent.
Thank you, David. Our next candidate is Vivian Gale. Vivian, as a newcomer to politics, if elected, how will you ensure you represent the communities of the Rosevears electorate and regularly consult with them on legislative matters?
I intend to be out and about every time I get a chance when I'm not sitting in Parliament. My approach is to listen, and the best way to do that is to actually meet people face to face. I will be going out to everyone and speaking to businesses, community people, community groups, older people, aged care. I will be there, out there, listening and collecting people's views. I believe everyone's view is valid. Everyone has a right to say something. Everyone has a right to be heard, and everyone has a right to have their views considered and voiced in Parliament when needed. That's what I intend to do. Obviously, I'll also be using the standard ways such as telephone, Facebook, internet, etc. I would always be there available, and like Kerry Finch, my telephone number would be advertised. I would always pick up the phone. That's what I do. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivian. Our next candidate is Jess Green. Jess, as a Labor Party candidate, would you judge legislation based on its merit, regardless of partisan politics, and ensure that the Legislative Council remains a house of review and not a rubber stamping process?
I joined the Labor Party at 18 because I have Labor values. I'll always listen to the evidence and consult with the community on decisions, and you can see that's the way that I've operated my campaign. I've been honest about my values, and people know where I stand on issues. I don't ignore the media, I don't ignore difficult questions or debates. Labor will always discuss legislation in caucus, of course, and I would feel more than comfortable raising my objections there to legislation. And of course, we have our state conference every year where we also discuss policy issues with our membership, because our party is member-led. I've always felt comfortable raising my opinion in the ALP, and I'm the Assistant Secretary of the Tasmanian ALP. I'm the President of my branch, and I am proud to be Labor.
Thank you, Jess. We now move to the candidates' closing statements. Each candidate will be given up to 2 minutes to deliver their closing statement. Up first is Jack Davenport. Jack, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. I want to firstly thank Tamar Valley News for organising this event tonight. It's a great part of our democracy and the electoral process. I originally joined the Labour Party, and it was after seeing their policies on fossil fuels and offshore detention that I realised that whatever my values were, they weren't those shared by Labour, and so I chose to join the Greens. The Greens share my values for the environment, for social justice, and to support people that are in need. As the Greens candidate, I want to be there for the people of Rosevears, to protect their local environment, with an understanding that what happens in one place can affect the other. If deforestation goes ahead, then it will have an impact on Rosevears. We've already seen the impact of pollution and climate change around the world. We saw with bushfires earlier this year how the smoke drifted from the mainland to Tasmania. We've even seen how certain species have become extinct, most notably recently the Tasmanian hamfish, which was declared extinct. What is going on at the moment is affecting us all, and these might seem like small matters, but they are having a big impact. And I want there to be a clear voice of integrity within the Legislative Council. I want there to be action within the Legislative Council, not just review. I didn't get into politics just to read documents. I got into politics to support my community, to support people, to make things happen. And I believe that they can happen under the Greens. I believe that there is room for a climate champion in the Legislative Council. I believe that there is a way to build sustainability and jobs for the future. And I believe that there's a way to clean up politics, and that is with the Greens. And I ask for you to vote for me on 1st of August. Thank you.
Thank you, Dak. Up next is Janie Finlay. Janie, you have 2 minutes.
On the 1st of August, I ask you to consider voting independent and voting for myself, Janie Finlay, as your independent representative. The Legislative Council in Tasmania has always been independent. It serves a really important role to keep the government to account, provide the checks and balances and the scrutiny of the government of the day. My skills and experience have been developed over my 46 years as a young person, with a family, in business, in local government. I'm proud of the skills and experience that I've developed. I'm strong, capable, experienced and kind. Over the past year, I've intentionally connected across the entire Rosevears electorate, in the urban areas, right into the city centre, Prospect, Summerhill, West Launceston and Trevally. And I've intentionally spent a lot of time in the West Tamar community, connecting with new people in new areas that I needed to learn a lot about. Over the last year, I've enjoyed being on farms, in small businesses, meeting with families, community organisations, sporting organisations, to really get to understand what's important to the people of Rosevears. Over the last 2 weekends, I visited 35 small communities in Rosevears to ensure that everybody had the opportunity to ask a question, to share something important, to share their story and what matters to them in Rosevears. If elected as your independent member to the Tasmanian Parliament, I would continue to connect, understand and learn from you, be an ambassador and an advocate for both Rosevears and the state of Tasmania. I love what I do, I love connecting in community, and I would be grateful for your support on the 1st of August to vote independent and to vote Janie Finlay. Thank you.
Thank you, Janie. Up next is David Fry. David, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. I'd like to begin my closing remarks tonight with restating the importance of an independent House of Review. Rosevears has always had an independent member. The Legislative Council, in its present form since 1856, has always been an independent House of Review. This election, for the first time ever, we face the risk of party dominance in the upper house if party candidates were elected in Huon and in Rosevears. I say to you tonight that it is important to maintain the independence of the upper house so that we have proper scrutiny of the legislation coming through from the government of whatever colour or stripe. I come to you as a person who's been involved in my community, as a person with experience in a number of different occupations, and as a person who's been involved in a number of community and volunteer organisations. I also come to you tonight as somebody with extensive experience as a shadow minister in an opposition. I've been involved in parliamentary committees. I've been involved in estimates, government business enterprise scrutiny, and I was Deputy Chair of the Community Development Committee of the Parliament. I have a lot of experience in dealing with complex legislation, and I bring that experience as well as my involvement in the community and in business and with the people of this area as the best person, as the best independent in this election, and I do ask for your support. It is important that we bring the independence of the upper house to the fore. We need people who will look and scrutinise legislation, not a party rubber stamp. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Up next is Vivian Gale. Vivian, you have 2 minutes.
I'm an independent thinker. I mentioned before, my approach is considered, collaborative and consultative. As an independent, I will listen to you, I will take your issues, I will take the time to understand. Often it actually is that, taking the time to understand. I can do that, I will do it. And I will take your views to Parliament, I will listen to everyone. I'll be open-minded, and I bring to Rosevears unique skills to ensure that legislation that goes before me in the upper house will be carefully scrutinised, and I have the skills to make better bills and safer bills. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivian. Up next is Jess Green. Jess, you have 2 minutes.
I'd like to start by thanking Zach and the team for organising the debate tonight. Due to COVID, we haven't really had the opportunity to all get together and debate issues, so I'm really pleased that we could all be here this evening. I also want to thank all of the candidates for the manner of which you've presented tonight and also throughout the campaign. At the end of the day, we all want the same thing. We all care about our community, and that's why we've taken the step to put our hand up. I also wish the candidates good luck in our final week and a good rest next Sunday, and I hope you spend it with your families. I certainly know that I haven't spent a lot of time with my family lately other than on the campaign trail. Win or lose, I will always be an advocate for our community. I'm so passionate about this region, and that's why I'm so thrilled that I'm now serving on West Tamar Council. We have a huge challenge ahead of us to get people back into work, retrained and re-skilled, and looking after people that have been really hard hit in the coronavirus pandemic. But I'm up for the challenge, and I seek your number one vote next Saturday. Thank you.
Thank you, Jess. That brings us to the end of tonight's debate. I just want to take this time to thank all the candidates for making the effort to attend tonight, and to thank you, our viewers, for watching. For those watching in the Tamar Valley region, you may have noticed the absence of our Tamar Valley newspaper throughout the coronavirus pandemic. Printing of the newspaper was placed on hold throughout the pandemic, and as you may be aware, we changed ownership on the 1st of July. And as the new Managing Director of Hyperlocal Media, I'm pleased to announce that the Tamar Valley newspaper will be back in print and distributed throughout the region as of September. In the meantime, we will be publishing content on our website, tamarvalleynews.com.au. We are also tonight launching the Tasmanian Browser, a new locally owned and operated source for Tasmanian news and stories. Visit tasmanianbrowser.com.au and find us on Facebook to learn more. It's been a pleasure hosting tonight's debate, and we look forward to bringing you more local news in the very near future. And on a last note, thank you to those of you who stuck with us through our technical difficulties tonight. It was our first time doing the live stream, and as expected, there's always one major flaw when you do these things, and I'm glad that we found it early and managed to fix it and recover from it. Thank you.
Hyperlocal Media is proud to launch the Tasmanian Browser, your new source for local news and stories that affect everyday Tasmanians. For locally owned independent news and stories from local Tasmanian communities, visit tasmanianbrowser.com.au and find us on Facebook.